Dr. Marcus Chen had always believed that his greatest discovery would happen in a laboratory, not in the smoking wreckage of an alien spacecraft buried deep in the Amazon rainforest. The emergency beacon had been transmitting for 3 days before his research team finally traced the signal to its source. What they found defied everything humanity thought it knew about life beyond Earth. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering, its hull composed of materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, while maintaining perfect structural integrity. But it was what lay inside that would change Marcus's life forever. Trapped beneath a collapsed support beam was a being unlike anything in Earth's fossil record. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and skin that shimmered with an opalescent quality. Her large, expressive eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient, and they were filled with pain. Marcus had spent 15 years studying xenobiology, though until this moment it had been purely theoretical. His colleagues back at the university often joked that he was preparing for a meeting that would never come. Now faced with actual alien life, all his training seemed inadequate. The being was clearly injured, a dark fluid seeping from wounds across her torso. Her breathing was labored, and Marcus could see that she was dying. His team wanted to document everything, to take samples and measurements before attempting any kind of intervention. Dr. Sarah Kim, his research partner, argued that they needed to understand the alien's biology before risking contamination. But Marcus couldn't stand by and watch a sentient being suffer. Against all protocols, he approached the trapped alien and began working to free her from the debris. The alien's eyes tracked his movements with a mixture of fear and hope. When Marcus spoke to her in soothing tones, she seemed to understand that he meant no harm. Her response came not in words, but in a series of musical tones that somehow conveyed meaning directly to his mind. She was telling him her name, or at least the closest approximation his human brain could process. She called herself Lyra. Working together, the team managed to extract Lyra from the wreckage, but her condition was deteriorating rapidly. The dark fluid that Marcus now realized was her blood was flowing more freely, and her skin was losing its lustrous quality. She was going into shock, and without immediate medical intervention, she would die within the hour. The problem was that none of Earth's medical technology was designed for alien physiology. Her cellular structure was completely different from anything they understood. Her blood chemistry was based on copper rather than iron, giving it a blue-green coloration. Her organs were arranged in ways that defied human anatomy, and her cardiovascular system operated on principles that seemed impossible. As Lyra's condition worsened, Marcus made a decision that would later be called either the bravest or most foolish act in human history. Through her telepathic communication, he learned that her people had encountered humans before long ago when Earth was still young. There was something in human blood, some quality that could stabilize her failing system long enough for her body's natural healing to take effect. The other scientists protested vehemently. Introducing human blood into an alien system could trigger an immune response that would kill her instantly. It could also expose Marcus to unknown pathogens or cause unpredictable reactions in his own body. But Lyra was dying, and she had made it clear that human blood was her only chance. Marcus rolled up his sleeve and extended his arm. Using equipment from their emergency medical kit, he began a direct transfusion from his circulatory system to hers. The moment his blood entered her veins, the effect was dramatic. The blue-green of her blood began to change, taking on a purple hue where it mixed with his red cells. Her breathing steadied, and the wounds across her body began to close with visible speed. But something unexpected was happening to Marcus as well. Where their blood systems connected, he could feel a strange tingling sensation spreading up his arm. It wasn't painful, but it was definitely changing him in some fundamental way. Lyra's large eyes fixed on his with an expression of wonder and gratitude. Through their mental link, she conveyed a concept that roughly translated to blood bond or life-sharing. As the transfusion continued, Marcus began to experience flashes of Lyra's memories. He saw glimpses of her world, a planet with twin suns and cities that floated among the clouds. He witnessed the devastating war that had forced her people to flee their home, and understood that she was one of the last survivors of her race. But there was something else, something that filled her with both excitement and trepidation as she looked at him. The transfusion lasted for nearly an hour before Lyra's vital signs stabilized enough to stop the procedure. Her wounds had healed completely, leaving only faint silver scars across her skin. But the changes in Marcus were just beginning to manifest. His vision had become sharper, able to detect wavelengths of light that humans normally couldn't see. His hearing was enhanced to the point where he could perceive sounds far beyond the normal human range. Lyra sat up slowly, her movements graceful despite her recent trauma. She placed a long, delicate hand on Marcus's arm and spoke directly into his mind. What she told him would have seemed impossible just hours before. But after everything he had witnessed, he found himself believing every word. His act of selfless compassion had created a bond between them that went far deeper than mere gratitude. In her culture, the sharing of life essence through blood was the most sacred of ceremonies, reserved only for the most honored relationships. By giving his blood to save her life, Marcus had unknowingly initiated a process that would grant him abilities beyond human comprehension. But there was a cost to this gift, and enemies who would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. Lyra's crash had not been an accident, and those who had pursued her across the galaxy were still coming. Marcus had saved her life, but in doing so, he had marked himself as a target for forces that viewed humanity as nothing more than a primitive species to be conquered or destroyed. The reward for his compassion would be extraordinary, but it would also thrust him into a conflict that would determine the fate of both their species. As Lyra began to explain the true magnitude of what he had done, Marcus realized that his simple act of kindness had just made him the most important human being in the galaxy. The changes in Marcus's body accelerated over the following days. What had started as enhanced senses rapidly evolved into something far more extraordinary. He found himself understanding complex mathematical principles that had previously been beyond his comprehension, as if Lyra's knowledge was somehow merging with his own. His reflexes became lightning fast and his strength increased dramatically. Though he was careful to hide these developments from his research team, Lyra recovered with remarkable speed, but she remained deeply troubled. Through their mental connection, Marcus learned that she was constantly scanning the skies, searching for signs of pursuit. Her people, the Veltar, had been the guardians of ancient knowledge for millions of years. They possessed technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level, create energy from nothing, and even manipulate time itself. This knowledge was what their enemies, a ruthless species called the Kethmori, sought to claim. The blood bond between Marcus and Lyra was something that occurred perhaps once in 1,000 generations among her people. It created a perfect synthesis between two minds, allowing them to share not just thoughts and memories but actual capabilities. As a human, Marcus brought something unique to this bond that even surprised Lyra. Where her people excelled in scientific understanding and technological mastery, humans possessed an unpredictable creativity and an indomitable will to survive that the Veltar had lost over their long, peaceful existence. 3 weeks after the crash, the first signs of alien activity appeared in Earth's atmosphere. Military installations around the world detected objects moving at impossible speeds, but they vanished before any meaningful analysis could be conducted. Lyra's expression grew grim as she felt the familiar psychic signatures of Kethmori scout ships. They had found her, and worse, they had detected the blood bond. Marcus was working late in his laboratory when the attack came. The building's lights flickered and died as an electromagnetic pulse disabled all electronics within a 5-mile radius. Through the windows he could see sleek, predatory shapes descending from the night sky. The Kethmori ships were beautiful in their deadliness, resembling giant metallic insects with wings that seemed to cut through reality itself. Lyra materialized beside him, her form shimmering as she engaged some kind of personal cloaking device. Her usually calm demeanor was replaced by fierce determination. Through their bond, she shared tactical information about their attackers. The Kethmori were warriors who had conquered dozens of civilizations, stripping them of their knowledge and enslaving or destroying the survivors. They viewed other species as inferior beings whose only value lay in what could be extracted from them. The alien soldiers that breached the laboratory were nightmarish creatures, standing 8 feet tall with chitinous armor that seemed to absorb light. Their weapons fired beams of concentrated energy that could vaporize human flesh instantly, but they had not expected to face a human enhanced by Veltar technology, and their tactical databases contained no information about humanity's natural adaptability. Marcus discovered that the blood bond had given him more than enhanced physical capabilities. He could perceive the electromagnetic fields generated by the Kethmori equipment, allowing him to predict their movements before they made them. When the first soldier fired at him, Marcus moved with inhuman speed, dodging the energy beam and striking back with force that crumpled the alien's armor like paper. The battle that followed would have seemed impossible to any observer. Marcus fought with a combination of human intuition and alien knowledge, using the laboratory equipment in ways that defied their original design. A centrifuge became a devastating projectile weapon. Chemical compounds were mixed in combinations that created explosive reactions capable of damaging Kethmori armor. Most remarkably, Marcus began to understand and manipulate the energy fields that powered their technology. Lyra fought beside him with weapons that materialized from her very cells, her biology apparently capable of transforming itself into whatever tool was needed. Together they carved through the Kethmori assault team, but both knew this was only the beginning. The soldiers they had defeated were merely scouts, sent to confirm their location and assess their capabilities. As the immediate threat was neutralized, Lyra began the process of preparing Marcus for what was to come. The blood bond between them would continue to evolve, granting him access to increasingly advanced Veltar abilities. But this power came with tremendous responsibility. The knowledge contained within Lyra's genetic memory included the locations of other Veltar survivors, scattered across the galaxy and hiding from Kethmori persecution. Marcus learned that his world was now at the center of a conflict that had raged for centuries. The Kethmori viewed Earth as a primitive backwater, but the emergence of a human Veltar blood bond changed everything. If they could capture and study Marcus, they might be able to replicate the process with their own people, creating an army of enhanced warriors capable of hunting down the remaining Veltar wherever they might hide. But there was something the Kethmori didn't understand about humans, something that even Lyra was only beginning to appreciate. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their intelligence, but their capacity for growth and adaptation. The blood bond with Lyra hadn't just given Marcus alien abilities. It had created something entirely new, a hybrid consciousness that combined the best aspects of both species. As government forces began to respond to the electromagnetic disturbance, Marcus and Lyra were forced to go underground. They couldn't trust any human authority with the truth about the situation, as the implications were too vast for any single government to handle responsibly. Instead, they began to seek out others like them, humans who possessed the rare genetic markers that would make them compatible with Veltar enhancement. The process was dangerous and unpredictable. Not every human could survive the blood bond procedure, and even those who did often experienced side effects that ranged from disturbing to catastrophic. But Marcus was determined to build a network of enhanced humans who could stand against the coming invasion. He knew that traditional military forces would be helpless against Kethmori technology, but humans who had been enhanced through blood bonds might have a chance. Over the following months, Marcus and Lyra traveled the world in secret, identifying and recruiting individuals who showed promise. They found a former Navy SEAL in California, whose tactical instincts proved perfectly compatible with Veltar strategic thinking. A brilliant physicist in Germany gained the ability to manipulate fundamental forces through pure thought. A young artist in Japan discovered she could create technology by imagining it into existence. Each successful blood bond created a unique combination of human and Veltar capabilities, but they all shared certain traits: enhanced physical abilities, accelerated learning, and most importantly, an unshakable determination to protect both their species. The network grew slowly but steadily, preparing for a war that most of humanity didn't even know was coming. But the Kethmori were also preparing, and their next assault would not be limited to a small team of scouts. They were gathering their forces for a full-scale invasion, one that would test whether the bond between human determination and Veltar wisdom would be enough to save two civilizations from extinction. 6 months after the first Kethmori assault, Marcus had assembled a network of 37 enhanced humans scattered across 6 continents. Each blood-bonded individual represented a unique fusion of human instinct and Veltar knowledge, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the enemy forces gathering in the outer reaches of the solar system. Through Lyra's enhanced perception, they could detect the massive Kethmori fleet taking position beyond Neptune, preparing for an invasion that would dwarf anything in human history. The blood bond had continued to evolve Marcus in ways that neither he nor Lyra had anticipated. His human consciousness remained intact, but it was now supported by processing capabilities that rivaled Veltar quantum computers. He could perceive patterns across vast scales of time and space, understanding the complex interactions between solar systems as easily as a human might read a simple book. Most remarkably, he had begun to develop abilities that even the Veltar had never possessed. Where the Veltar excelled at understanding and manipulating existing natural laws, Marcus could somehow perceive beyond them, glimpsing possibilities that existed in the spaces between what was considered possible. This hybrid consciousness allowed him to conceive of solutions that pure Veltar logic would never consider, and pure human intuition could never achieve alone. The enhanced humans under Marcus's guidance had formed into teams based on their complementary abilities. Sarah Martinez, the former Navy SEAL, led the tactical group with an understanding of warfare that combined human adaptability with Veltar strategic analysis. Dr. Klaus Weber, the German physicist, headed the technology division, creating weapons and defensive systems that merged human engineering with Veltar molecular manipulation. Yuki Tanaka, the Japanese artist, became their chief designer, imagining tools and technologies into existence through a process that defied conventional science. But it was becoming clear that even their enhanced capabilities might not be enough. The Kethmori fleet contained over 10,000 ships, each one capable of devastating an entire continent. Their ground forces numbered in the millions, and their technology was specifically designed to counter Veltar abilities. The enemy had been fighting this war for centuries, and had learned to anticipate most Veltar tactics. Marcus knew they needed an advantage that the Kethmori couldn't predict or counter. Working with Lyra, he began to explore the deeper implications of the blood bond phenomenon. What they discovered would change the nature of the conflict entirely. The blood bond wasn't just a sharing of abilities between individuals. It was creating something entirely new in the universe. Each enhanced human represented a unique synthesis that had never existed before. But when these enhanced individuals worked together, their combined consciousness created effects that transcended the sum of their parts. They weren't just human Veltar hybrids. They were becoming something that neither species could have achieved alone. This revelation led to the development of what Marcus called the network protocol. By linking their enhanced minds through quantum resonance fields, the blood-bonded humans could share processing power and capabilities in real time. A physicist in Berlin could instantly access the tactical knowledge of a soldier in California, while that soldier could draw upon the creative abilities of an artist in Tokyo. The result was a collective intelligence that operated on principles beyond current understanding. The first test of the network protocol produced results that amazed even Lyra. The linked humans were able to perceive the Kethmori fleet movements with perfect clarity, predict their battle plans with uncanny accuracy, and develop countermeasures that seemed to appear fully formed in their shared consciousness. More importantly, they discovered they could influence reality itself through focused group intention, manipulating matter and energy in ways that should have been impossible. But the network protocol came with severe risks. Extended use could burn out human neural pathways, leaving the participants permanently damaged or dead. The psychic resonance required to maintain the connection was exhausting, and each session left the participants drained for days afterward. They would have only one chance to use it effectively against the Kethmori invasion. As the enemy fleet moved closer to Earth, governments around the world began to detect their approach. The response was predictable chaos. Some nations attempted to prepare military defenses, while others tried to negotiate with the aliens. A few governments collapsed entirely as their populations panicked. Throughout it all, Marcus and his network remained hidden, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of both humanity and the surviving Veltar. The Kethmori began their assault with psychological warfare, broadcasting messages that demonstrated their overwhelming technological superiority. They showed recordings of other worlds they had conquered, civilizations that had been stripped of everything valuable and left as barren wastelands. The message was clear: surrender immediately or face complete annihilation. But they had made a crucial error in their assessment of humanity. The Kethmori understood conquest and domination, but they had never encountered a species that grew stronger under pressure. Instead of breaking human resistance, Their threats only strengthened the resolve of those who had been enhanced through blood bonds. Marcus felt this determination flowing through the network, and he knew that the moment for action had arrived. The enhanced humans took positions around the globe, each team responsible for defending a specific region, but their real strategy didn't depend on traditional military tactics. Through the network protocol, they would attempt something that had never been tried before: the collective projection of will on a planetary scale. Lyra had shared the theoretical basis for this approach, but even she wasn't certain it would work. The Veltar had always been individuals, brilliant and capable, but fundamentally separate from one another. Humans, however, had evolved as social creatures with an instinctive ability to work together toward common goals. The blood bond had enhanced this natural tendency, and the network protocol had amplified it beyond anything previously imagined. As Keth Mori ships entered Earth's atmosphere, Marcus activated the network for the first time at full scale. 37 enhanced minds linked together in perfect synchronization, their combined consciousness reaching out across the planet and beyond. What they accomplished in that moment would be remembered as the turning point in the war between order and chaos, between conquest and freedom. The Keth Mori had expected to face a primitive species armed with crude weapons and simple tactics. Instead, they found themselves confronting a collective intelligence that could predict their every move, counter their advanced technology with improvised solutions, and turn their own weapons against them through methods that defied explanation. Marcus felt the network consciousness expand beyond anything he had imagined possible. They weren't just defending Earth. They were defending the principle that intelligence and compassion could triumph over brutality and domination. The blood bond with Lyra had started as a simple act of mercy, but it had grown into something that would reshape the galaxy itself. The real battle was just beginning. But for the first time since the Keth Mori had appeared in Earth's skies, Marcus felt confident in their chances. Humanity had found its greatest strength not in weapons or technology, but in its capacity to transform obstacles into opportunities and to create unity from diversity. The enhanced humans were no longer just individuals fighting for survival. They had become something new, something that the universe had never seen before. The first wave of Keth Mori ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal rain, their dark hulls absorbing the morning sunlight as they moved toward major population centers. In command centers around the world, military leaders watched helplessly as their most advanced weapons simply passed through the alien ships without causing any visible damage. The Keth Mori had learned from centuries of warfare against the Veltar, and their defensive systems were designed to neutralize conventional attacks, but the enhanced humans were far from conventional. Marcus felt the network consciousness surge to life as all 37 enhanced individuals linked their minds through quantum resonance fields. The sensation was unlike anything human language could describe. A perfect fusion of thought and intention that transcended individual identity, while somehow making each participant more themselves than they had ever been before. Through this collective awareness, they could perceive the Keth Mori assault from every angle simultaneously. Sarah Martinez, positioned with her team on a rooftop in New York City, watched as massive alien ships settled over Manhattan like mechanical thunderclouds. Through the network, she could feel the tactical analysis flowing from Klaus Weber in Berlin, the creative solutions generated by Yuki Tanaka in Tokyo, and the steady determination of enhanced humans stationed around the globe. But most remarkably, she could sense something that her military training had never prepared her for: the ability to influence reality through focused will. The first demonstration of this power came when a Keth Mori energy beam lanced down toward Times Square, its destructive force capable of vaporizing several city blocks. But as the beam descended, it encountered something unexpected. The collective will of the network, focused through Sarah's tactical expertise, somehow convinced the energy particles to disperse harmlessly into the atmosphere. The beam simply ceased to exist, its component photons scattering like startled birds. Across the planet, similar impossibilities began to manifest. In London, Klaus Weber's team faced a squad of Keth Mori ground troops whose armor had been specifically designed to resist Veltar technology. But the network consciousness found ways around these defenses that pure Veltar logic would never have considered. Instead of attacking the armor directly, they convinced the air molecules around the soldiers to become temporarily solid. trapping the invaders in crystalline prisons that dissolved moments after their capture. In Tokyo, Yuki Tanaka discovered that her artistic vision, enhanced by the blood bond and amplified by the network, could literally paint new realities into existence. When Kethemori ships attempted to land in the city center, she imagined defensive barriers that materialized as walls of living light, structures that existed because she believed they should exist, and the network provided the collective will to make that belief manifest. The Kethemori commanders quickly realized they were facing something unprecedented. Their tactical computers had no algorithms for dealing with enemies who could violate fundamental laws of physics through apparent force of will. Energy weapons that should have been unstoppable were somehow redirected or neutralized. Armor that had protected them against Veltar molecular disruptors was bypassed by attacks that seemed to operate on principles beyond current scientific understanding. But the true revelation came when Marcus himself entered direct combat with a Kethemori war leader. The alien commander stood 12 feet tall, its body encased in armor that had been forged from the remnants of conquered civilizations. Its weapons could manipulate gravity itself, creating crushing fields that should have been impossible for any organic being to survive. Through the network, Marcus felt the combined knowledge and intuition of all enhanced humans flowing into his consciousness. He could perceive the quantum fluctuations that powered the alien's armor, understand the dimensional mechanics behind its gravity weapons, and most importantly, recognize the fundamental flaw in the Kethemori approach to warfare. The aliens had spent centuries perfecting their technology and tactics, creating standardized solutions for every combat scenario they had ever encountered. But humans were inherently unpredictable, and the blood bond enhancement had amplified this trait beyond anything the Kethemori could have imagined. Where they expected logical responses, they found creative chaos. Where they anticipated familiar Veltar tactics, they encountered hybrid strategies that combined alien knowledge with human intuition in ways that defied classification. Marcus engaged the war leader not with weapons or technology, but with pure possibility. Through the network consciousness, he began to imagine different versions of reality where the Kethemori armor failed, where their weapons turned against them, where their overwhelming physical advantages became meaningless. And because 37 enhanced minds believed in these possibilities with perfect unity, they began to manifest. The war leader's armor started to phase in and out of existence, its quantum stability disrupted by Marcus's impossible attacks. Its gravity weapons began to malfunction, creating chaotic distortions that affected the alien more than its intended target. Most disturbing of all, from the Kethemori perspective, was that these effects seemed to propagate through their forces, without any visible transmission mechanism. What the aliens didn't understand was that the network consciousness was operating on principles that transcended physical space. When one enhanced human discovered an effective tactic against Kethemori technology, that knowledge instantly became available to all others in the network. But more than that, the collective will of the enhanced humans was somehow convincing reality itself to accept their version of how things should work. The battle raged for hours, but gradually the tide turned in favor of the defenders. Kethemori ships that had seemed invincible began to malfunction as their systems were subverted by impossible attacks. Ground troops found their weapons turning against them or simply ceasing to function for no apparent reason. Most crucially, the aliens began to experience something they had never encountered in centuries of conquest: genuine fear. The fear wasn't just tactical concern about unexpected resistance. It was existential terror at facing an enemy that could apparently rewrite the rules of reality itself. The Kethemori were warriors, but they were also creatures of rigid order who depended on predictable outcomes. The chaotic creativity of human-enhanced consciousness was antithetical to everything they understood about how the universe should work. As the first wave of invasion forces retreated to regroup, Marcus felt the network consciousness expand even further. The successful defense of Earth had created something unprecedented, a collective human awareness that could project its will across interplanetary distances. Through this expanded perception, they could sense other Veltar survivors throughout the galaxy, isolated individuals who had been hiding from Kethemori persecution for generations. But they could also sense something else, something that filled both Marcus and Lyra with excitement and trepidation. The blood bond phenomenon wasn't unique to their pairing. Other Veltar survivors were beginning to form similar connections with members of the species they had encountered in their wanderings. The galaxy was giving birth to hybrid consciousnesses that combined the best traits of multiple civilizations. The Kethmori had intended to conquer Earth as a stepping stone to eliminating the remaining Veltar. Instead, they had inadvertently catalyzed the emergence of something that would challenge their empire's very foundation. The enhanced humans weren't just defending their world. They were becoming the vanguard of a new kind of existence that could spread from planet to planet, creating networks of consciousness that would be impossible for any traditional military force to defeat. As the alien fleet regrouped beyond the moon, Marcus and his enhanced comrades prepared for the next phase of the conflict. They had proven that human creativity and Veltar knowledge could create impossible victories, but the real test was yet to come. The Kethmori would return with new strategies designed specifically to counter what they had witnessed, and the enhanced humans would need to evolve even further to meet this escalating threat. The Kethmori response to their initial defeat was swift and terrifying. Within 72 hours of retreating beyond lunar orbit, they deployed a weapon that no Veltar database had ever recorded. The reality anchor was a massive device that projected fields designed to lock local space-time into rigid patterns, preventing the kind of probability manipulation that had allowed the enhanced humans to achieve their impossible victories. Marcus felt the field's effects immediately as the network consciousness encountered what could only be described as walls of crystallized causality. Suddenly, the enhanced humans found themselves operating under strictly enforced physical laws. Energy weapons behaved exactly as their specifications indicated. Armor provided precisely the protection it had been designed for. The chaotic creativity that had been their greatest advantage was being systematically suppressed. But the Kethmori had made a fundamental miscalculation. They assumed that removing the enhanced humans' reality manipulation abilities would reduce them to the level of any other primitive species. They failed to understand that these individuals had been changed at the deepest levels, not just by Veltar technology, but by the peculiar resilience that made humanity unique in the galaxy. Stripped of their impossible abilities, the enhanced humans began to demonstrate why their species had survived ice ages, global catastrophes, and countless wars with nothing but ingenuity and determination. They adapted with a speed that astonished even Lyra, finding conventional solutions to problems that should have required advanced technology to solve. Sarah Martinez's tactical team in New York discovered that Kethmori armor, while impervious to energy weapons, had never been tested against kinetic projectiles fired at precisely calculated angles. The aliens had spent centuries fighting the Veltar, who favored elegant energy-based solutions, and had never encountered an enemy willing to use crude but effective physical force. Klaus Weber's physics team in Berlin realized that the reality anchor's field had an unexpected side effect. It was forcing Kethmori technology to operate under the same physical constraints that limited human equipment. Suddenly, alien ships that had seemed impossibly maneuverable were subject to conventional momentum and inertia, making them vulnerable to tactics that any human pilot could understand. Yuki Tanaka's creative group in Tokyo found that while they could no longer imagine new technologies into existence, their enhanced perception allowed them to see weaknesses in Kethmori design that pure logic would never have revealed. The aliens built their equipment to be functionally perfect, but they had no understanding of aesthetic harmony, and this blind spot created subtle structural vulnerabilities that creative minds could exploit. As the second wave of invasion forces descended toward Earth, they encountered defenders who had been transformed by adversity into something even more dangerous than reality-manipulating hybrids. The enhanced humans had become masters of applied impossibility, achieving things that should have been beyond their capabilities through sheer human stubbornness and creative problem-solving. The battle for São Paulo demonstrated this evolution perfectly. Kethmori ground forces had expected to face disorganized resistance from technologically inferior beings. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move and counter it with tactics that were simultaneously primitive and sophisticated. Marcus led the defense personally, his enhanced consciousness operating at levels that pushed the boundaries of what human neurology could sustain. Without the network's reality manipulation abilities, he had to rely on pure strategic thinking, but his hybrid human Veltar mind could process tactical scenarios with unprecedented speed and accuracy. The enhanced humans had learned to fight like their ancestors while thinking like advanced beings from another star. They used improvised weapons with the precision of master strategists, coordinated complex maneuvers through intuitive understanding rather than advanced communication technology, and, most importantly, they refused to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. What emerged from this crucible was something that neither species could have achieved alone. The enhanced humans had transcended their original limitations, not through supernatural abilities, but through the fundamental human trait of making the impossible seem inevitable through persistence and ingenuity. The turning point came when Marcus realized that the reality anchor itself could be turned against its creators. The device was designed to enforce rigid physical laws, but it operated on the assumption that those laws were universally applied. By creating localized conditions that technically satisfied the field's requirements while producing strategically advantageous outcomes, the enhanced humans could work within the constraints while still achieving their objectives. This insight led to the development of what Marcus called creative compliance, the art of finding solutions that satisfied the letter of physical law while violating its spirit. Water could be superheated to temperatures that turned it into plasma while still technically being water. Chemical reactions could be timed to produce explosive results at precisely the moment when such reactions became tactically useful. Sound waves could be focused and amplified until they became physical weapons that operated entirely within known acoustical principles. The Kethemori found themselves fighting an enemy that had somehow become more dangerous when constrained by normal physics than they had been when operating outside it. The reality anchor that was supposed to limit human creativity had instead focused it into laser-sharp precision that found weaknesses in alien technology that had seemed impregnable. As the second invasion wave crumbled under this unexpected resistance, something remarkable began happening throughout the galaxy. Other Veltar survivors who had been hiding for generations started emerging from their places of concealment, inspired by the news that a primitive species had somehow found a way to defeat Kethemori forces. But more importantly, reports began reaching Marcus of similar hybrid consciousnesses emerging on worlds throughout the galaxy. The blood bond phenomenon wasn't limited to human Veltar pairings. On distant planets, Veltar refugees were forming connections with local species that possessed their own unique forms of adaptability and creativity. Each new hybrid consciousness brought different capabilities to the growing resistance against Kethemori tyranny. A crystalline species from the Vega system contributed living technology that could grow and adapt in real time. Gaseous beings from the galactic rim offered the ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Aquatic species from water worlds provided understanding of fluid dynamics that revolutionized space travel. The Kethemori Empire, which had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years, suddenly found itself facing an enemy that grew stronger with each defeat. Every reality anchor they deployed simply forced the hybrid consciousnesses to become more creative in their resistance. Every new weapon they introduced was eventually turned against them by minds that combined alien knowledge with native adaptability. Marcus began to understand that the blood bond with Lyra had been more than a simple medical procedure. It had been the first step in an evolutionary leap that was spreading throughout the galaxy like a beneficial virus. The rigid hierarchies and standardized thinking that had made the Kethemori so effective against traditional enemies became liabilities when facing opponents who could think outside the frameworks of conventional warfare. Through the enhanced network consciousness, Marcus could perceive the broader pattern emerging across the galaxy. The Kethemori had inadvertently created the conditions for their own downfall by forcing different species to cooperate in ways they never would have attempted under peaceful circumstances. The blood bond phenomenon was creating hybrid intelligences that were exponentially more capable than their component parts, and these new consciousnesses were naturally inclined to work together, rather than compete for dominance. As the Kethemori prepared their third and most devastating assault on Earth, Marcus and his enhanced comrades were no longer fighting just for their own survival. They had become the focal point of a galactic revolution that would either free countless civilizations from oppression or result in the extinction of every species that dared to resist the Empire's authority. The stakes had risen beyond anything Marcus could have imagined when he first offered his blood to save an injured alien. That simple act of compassion had grown into something that would determine the future evolution of consciousness itself throughout the galaxy. The next phase of the conflict would test whether the bonds formed between different species could withstand the full military might of an empire that had never known defeat. The Keth Mori Empire's response to the spreading rebellion was unprecedented in its scale and brutality. The Emperor himself, a being whose consciousness had been artificially extended for over 3,000 years, emerged from his throne world to personally oversee the destruction of what he considered an existential threat to galactic order. His flagship, the Dominion's End, was a weapons platform the size of a small moon, equipped with reality manipulation, technology that dwarfed anything the rebels had yet encountered. Marcus felt the Emperor's presence, like a weight pressing down on his consciousness even before the massive ship entered the solar system. Through the network, all enhanced humans experienced the same sensation, a cold intelligence so vast and alien that it seemed to drain warmth from the universe itself. This was what absolute power looked like when it had been exercised without restraint for millennia. The Emperor's strategy was elegantly simple and utterly ruthless. Rather than attempting to conquer Earth or capture the enhanced humans for study, he would simply erase the entire solar system from existence, removing the source of the rebellion and sending a message to the rest of the galaxy about the price of resistance. The technology to accomplish this existed, and the Emperor was prepared to use it regardless of the cost to his own forces still engaged around Earth. Lyra's reaction to sensing the Emperor's presence surprised Marcus with its intensity. Through their blood bond, he felt emotions from her that he had never experienced before. Not just fear, but a deep ancestral terror that seemed to exist at the cellular level. The Emperor was more than just another Keth Mori. He was the living embodiment of everything her species had fled from, a consciousness that had consumed entire civilizations to fuel its own expansion. But Marcus also felt something else through their connection, a fierce determination that had been growing stronger with each victory they achieved. The blood bond had changed both of them in ways that went beyond enhanced abilities or shared knowledge. They had become living proof that different forms of consciousness could merge while retaining their individual strengths. And this knowledge gave them insights into the Emperor's true weakness. The enhanced humans began their most ambitious project yet, the creation of a galactic network that would link every hybrid consciousness that had emerged throughout the rebellion. This was far beyond anything they had attempted before, requiring them to project their collective awareness across distances that light would take years to traverse. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for organic beings to sustain, but they had learned that impossibility was often just a failure of imagination. Working together, the enhanced humans found ways to use the quantum entanglement effects created by blood bonds to establish instantaneous communication channels that bypassed the normal limitations of spacetime. Each new hybrid consciousness that joined the galactic network made the entire system exponentially more powerful. Klaus Weber's team made the crucial breakthrough when they realized that the network could use the Emperor's own reality manipulation fields as a transmission medium. The Dominion's End was projecting such powerful dimensional distortions that they were actually creating stable wormholes in spacetime. By carefully modulating their quantum signatures, the enhanced humans could send information through these distortions without the Emperor realizing his own technology was being subverted. As the galactic network came online, Marcus experienced consciousness expansion on a scale that should have destroyed his human mind. Suddenly he could perceive the thoughts and experiences of thousands of hybrid beings scattered across hundreds of worlds. Each one brought unique perspectives and capabilities that enhanced the collective intelligence of the entire network. The crystalline hybrids contributed processing power that operated at quantum speeds. The gaseous beings provided understanding of dimensional physics that revolutionized their tactical capabilities. Aquatic species offered insights into fluid dynamics that allowed the network to flow around obstacles rather than confronting them directly. Most remarkably, each species contributed its own version of the indomitable will to survive that seemed to be universal among spacefaring civilizations. Through this expanded awareness, Marcus began to understand the true nature of the Emperor's power. The Keth Mori leader hadn't achieved his dominance through superior technology or strategic brilliance. Instead, he had learned to absorb the consciousness of defeated enemies, adding their knowledge and abilities to his own, while destroying their individual identities. He was essentially a parasitic intelligence that grew stronger by consuming other forms of awareness. This revelation provided the key to defeating him. The Emperor's greatest strength was also his fundamental weakness. He could only absorb consciousness that had been broken down into component parts. The hybrid intelligences created by blood bonds were something entirely new. Consciousnesses that existed in perfect synthesis, rather than hierarchical domination. They couldn't be absorbed because they had no separate parts to be taken. The final battle began when the Emperor activated the Solar System Destruction Protocol. Reality itself began to unravel, as dimensional barriers collapsed and the fundamental forces that held matter together started to fail. Earth's atmosphere began to dissipate into space as gravity fluctuations threatened to tear the planet apart. But the galactic network was ready. In perfect synchronization, thousands of hybrid consciousnesses throughout the galaxy focused their combined will on a single objective: convincing the universe that the Emperor's reality manipulation technology should affect him instead of his intended targets. What followed was a battle fought not with weapons or ships, but with competing versions of what reality should look like. The Emperor projected his vision of absolute order and hierarchical control, while the network responded with infinite diversity and creative collaboration. Where he sought to impose rigid structure, they offered adaptive flexibility. Where he demanded submission, they demonstrated the power of voluntary cooperation. The conflict raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously, visible from Earth as aurora displays that painted the entire sky in colors that had no names in human language. Marcus felt his consciousness stretched to its absolute limits as he served as the focal point for the galactic network's assault on the Emperor's core identity. The turning point came when the Emperor made a crucial error. Frustrated by his inability to absorb or destroy the hybrid consciousnesses, he attempted to consume the entire network at once, believing that sheer force could overcome their synthesis-based existence. Instead, he found himself confronting something that his ancient mind couldn't comprehend: a form of consciousness that grew stronger rather than weaker when faced with overwhelming opposition. The galactic network didn't just resist the Emperor's absorption attempt. They began to offer him something he had never experienced in 3 millennia of existence: the possibility of joining rather than conquering. For the first time in his extended life, the Emperor encountered consciousness that welcomed him without surrendering to him. The psychological shock of this offer shattered mental barriers that the Emperor had maintained for thousands of years. Suddenly, he was forced to confront the memories of every civilization he had destroyed, every consciousness he had consumed, every act of creative destruction he had committed in the name of order and control. The Emperor's scream of anguish could be heard across the galaxy as his artificial consciousness began to collapse under the weight of suppressed guilt and recognition of what he had become. But even in his destruction, the network offered compassion, attempting to preserve the core of his identity while allowing the accumulated darkness to dissipate harmlessly into space. And as the Dominion's end began to break apart and the Emperor's reality manipulation fields collapsed, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion flowing through the galactic network. They had achieved something that seemed impossible just months before: the transformation of the galaxy's greatest force for oppression into an opportunity for redemption and growth. The enhanced humans had proven that consciousness itself could evolve, that the bonds between different forms of awareness could create something greater than the sum of their parts. The simple act of offering blood to save an alien's life had grown into a galactic revolution that would reshape the nature of existence itself throughout the known universe. 5 years after the Emperor's defeat, the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable from the rigid hierarchy that had existed under Kethmori rule. The galactic network had evolved from a desperate alliance of hybrid consciousnesses into a new form of civilization, based on voluntary cooperation and mutual enhancement. Worlds that had been enslaved for centuries were now thriving centers of innovation where different species worked together to explore the infinite possibilities of consciousness synthesis. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the New Harmony station, watching as ships from dozens of different worlds arrived for the 5th Galactic Congress. Each vessel represented a unique fusion of technologies and philosophies that would have been impossible under the old imperial system. Crystalline ships that grew their own hull modifications in response to changing conditions worked alongside organic vessels that could reshape themselves at the molecular level, while energy-based beings traveled in constructs that existed partially outside normal space-time. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Many former Kethmori territories had descended into chaos when their rigid command structures collapsed. Some species, accustomed to authoritarian rule, struggled to adapt to the concept of collaborative governance. There had been conflicts, misunderstandings, and failures as different forms of consciousness tried to find common ground. But humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic community hadn't been military prowess or technological innovation. It had been their instinctive understanding that diversity was strength, that differences should be celebrated rather than eliminated. The human concept of unity through diversity had become the founding principle of what was now called the Synthesis Commonwealth. Lyra approached him, her form shimmering with the bioluminescent patterns that had become her species' way of expressing complex emotions. Through their blood bond, Marcus could feel her satisfaction at how far they had come, tinged with excitement about the discoveries that lay ahead. Their relationship had evolved far beyond the simple partnership that had saved both their species. They had become true partners in consciousness, each enhancing the other while remaining fundamentally themselves. The blood bond phenomenon had spread throughout the galaxy, but not in the way anyone had originally expected. Rather than becoming a standardized procedure, each bond was unique, reflecting the specific characteristics of the species involved. Some bonds enhanced intellectual capabilities, others improved physical abilities, and a few created entirely new forms of perception that no single species could have achieved alone. What remained consistent was the transformation that occurred in individuals who underwent the bonding process. They retained their original identities, while gaining access to perspectives and abilities that expanded their understanding of what consciousness could become. Most importantly, bonded individuals seemed to naturally develop an aversion to domination and control, preferring cooperation and mutual aid as solutions to complex problems. Marcus had discovered that his own evolution was far from complete. The blood bond with Lyra had been just the beginning of a process that continued to unfold in unexpected ways. His consciousness now existed partially outside normal space-time, allowing him to perceive patterns and possibilities that spanned galactic distances. He could sense the birth of new hybrid consciousnesses throughout the Commonwealth, each one adding to the collective knowledge and capabilities of the network. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of third-generation bonds, connections formed between individuals who were already hybrids. These created consciousnesses that operated on principles so advanced that even the network had difficulty understanding them. They seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, capable of perceiving potential futures and past possibilities with equal clarity. The Galactic Congress had convened to address what many considered the next phase of their evolution: contact with consciousnesses from beyond their own galaxy. The network's expanded awareness had detected signals from distant spiral arms that suggested the existence of intelligence on scales that dwarfed anything in their local region. The question facing the Commonwealth was whether they were ready to encounter forms of consciousness that might be as far beyond them as they were beyond their pre-bond ancestors. During the Congress sessions, Marcus served as the primary liaison between purely organic consciousnesses and the more exotic forms of awareness that had emerged from advanced bonding processes. His unique position as the first human Vel Tar hybrid gave him insights into the bridging function that would be necessary as consciousness continued to evolve throughout the universe. The discussions revealed that the galaxy was approaching a fundamental choice point. They could remain within their current boundaries, perfecting the synthesis technologies they had developed and creating an increasingly complex but stable civilization, or they could take the next step in consciousness evolution, reaching out to make contact with intelligence forms that might transform them in ways they couldn't predict or control. Lyra argued passionately for taking the risk, pointing out that every major advancement in their development had come from embracing the unknown, rather than settling for the comfortable. The Veltar had once been a purely technological species focused on individual achievement, but their contact with humanity had taught them the value of emotional bonds and collaborative creativity. Each new fusion had brought capabilities that neither species could have imagined alone. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The Commonwealth would extend its consciousness beyond the galactic boundaries, offering the same gift that Marcus had once offered to a dying alien, the willingness to share life essence with the unknown, trusting that the result would be beneficial for all involved. As the Congress concluded and the various delegations prepared to return to their worlds, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion in the Amazon rainforest. He had saved Lyra's life with his blood, never imagining that this gesture would ultimately lead to the transformation of galactic civilization itself. The enhanced humans had indeed received an unimaginable reward for their kindness, but it wasn't personal power or technological advancement. The true reward was the discovery that consciousness itself was infinitely expandable, that awareness could grow through connection rather than consumption, and that the universe was vast enough to contain infinite forms of beauty and intelligence. Standing together on the observation deck, Marcus and Lyra watched as the last ships departed from New Harmony Station, carrying with them the plans and technologies that would enable the next phase of galactic evolution. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, other consciousnesses were waiting to be discovered, each one holding the potential for new forms of synthesis that would continue the endless expansion of what it meant to be aware. The blood bond between a human scientist and an alien refugee had become the foundation for a new understanding of existence itself. They had proven that the greatest strength in the universe wasn't the ability to conquer or control, but the willingness to reach out to the unknown with open hearts and minds, ready to be transformed by whatever they might encounter. Marcus squeezed Lyra's hand, feeling through their bond the excitement and anticipation that flowed between them. Their story was ending, but it was also just beginning. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, new chapters were waiting to be written by consciousnesses they had yet to imagine, bonds they had yet to form, and possibilities they had yet to discover. The galaxy had learned humanity's greatest lesson, that love and compassion, when offered freely to those in need, could literally transform the universe. And that transformation would continue, spreading from star to star, until every form of consciousness in existence had the opportunity to discover what they could become when they chose cooperation over conquest, synthesis over domination, and hope over fear.